I understood from this morning my job is to make you uncomfortable. But hopefully then to make you a little bit more comfortable again. But to first make you uncomfortable, or maybe this is not the uncomfortable question yet. The comfortable one is, raise your hand if you think that succession planning should be one of, let's say, the 5 most important strategic priorities of your business. If you didn't raise your hand, you should really concentrate in this session. Yes is the correct answer. Now, the uncomfortable question is, raise your hand if you currently have a succession plan that you are on track of executing. Okay, I won't call out all the people that didn't raise their hands. So I'm here to create a little bit of uncomfortableness. But this session is here to give you, hopefully, a little bit of guidance. This is not the how-to book of succession planning. I will have a slide up for you with some books that you can go and read. So this is not the manual. We are here to just, among friends, hear some stories, actual stories about some of the succession planning amongst our community. Now, in this community here, this is not a foreign concept that our businesses are not our own. We are called to be stewards. It's not about ownership. So Psalm 24, verse 1, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. So everything is the Lord's. We are called to be stewards, but we need to be faithful stewards. To be faithful stewards, we have been told by Jesus, suppose one of you wants to build a tower, won't you first down and estimate the cost? So it's about starting early and plan diligently. And in some of the stories, I think you will hear that it doesn't take 6 months or a year or 2 years to do succession planning well. It actually takes a long time. And so you need to start as early as you can. What is a successful transition in this community? I would say that successful transition is if mission and culture continues after the transition. Again, we've got different definitions of success, of business, and the impact that we want to hear. And I think in our community, one of the most challenging things to get right is not just to let the business survive economically, but to let the mission and the culture of what you've built survive. I mean, we all are here to really put the effort in to build businesses that are redemptive, to build business cultures that are redemptive. And our mission is not just making profit, but doing good in the world and making the world a better place. And that creates an additional challenge and a burden for us, especially in terms of succession, because we cannot just think about economic succession, but we have to think about how do we make the culture and the mission of our businesses and our organizations survive. And then there's, extra challenges we need to think about. It's about leadership and ownership. And we need to think about, in terms of ownership, how will that transition be funded? What ownership and equity arrangements do we need to make? Is there debt that need to be considered? So it quickly becomes a lacquer challenge. But on the bright side, there's also an opportunity for us. Currently in South Africa, a lot of family businesses are at the point where they are going to need to transition in terms of ownership. I would guess most family businesses aren't necessarily going to stay in the family, and they are either going to just disappear, or they can transition into ownership that's not in the family. So on the one end, that creates challenges for us as families and family businesses that have built a specific mission and a culture, built redemptive businesses. But it also creates opportunity for us as a community to bring businesses into the kingdom and into kingdom stewardship. So there's the challenge. We're not going to go into too much detail in this discussion, but that's another topic that I think we all need to start thinking about, and think about creating vehicles. And I know there's some of my ex-colleagues here that's busy creating a vehicle for specifically sort of succession of businesses into hands that are more redemptive. But there's a huge opportunity for us, I think, in this coming season of bringing businesses into the kingdom, because they are going to have to transition. So just putting that out there as a lacquer challenge for us. I'm going to leave this slide up. If you want to go and read some books, here's just a few suggestions. There's obviously many others, but these are good ones to start with. So, to my panel, thank you for being here, and some of you making a long trek. John all the way down from Pretoria, Promod all the way from Silicon Valley. So yeah, it's a long drive, Promod. So yeah, thanks so much for participating. John, to start with you, you are part of quite a unique situation. You are part of a family that has a family business that's now got a 5th generation of the family. And it's still within the family. So I want to know, how did you get that right? It obviously has been quite a challenge. And yeah, has it been successful? And if so, why?
Thanks, Almero. I think, yes, and good afternoon to everyone here. It's lovely to be in this part of the world. Quick intro to the answer is that I don't think necessarily we are getting it right. But we're trying our very best. So, business was started in 1919, export of citrus, grain, and other farming and agri-commodities, and farming over 3 provinces. So operationally it's got its issues, but then, as I shared with you over lunch, the issue of a family of 8 people growing to 23 in just the last 20 years has been a significant aspect to address in terms of succession. So part of it is what the future entails when we look at the future. So thinking whether it was an exceptional part to addressing the leadership, I think is part of it. So leadership is incredibly important, but I think rather than merely leadership, I think the intentionality in what we're trying to achieve is paramount since we started in 2013, specifically looking at the 5th generation transfer. Started off with grandpa, and then descended in the succeeding lines, and now for the 5th generation, we try to be intentional. And the way that we ask ourselves and test ourselves in the intentionality is that we try to farm for our unborn grandchildren. We try to get a picture of not withdrawing and getting the profit for this generation or implementing the profit here, but how can we expand that or extend that benefit from the profit especially. So I think the intentionality lies there in that we postpone the gratification for this generation into future generations. That has been significant in how we approached it. And maybe just the second part, which is the flip side of the intentionality, is probably the fact of how do you deal with conflict then. So assuming there are strong opinions in how intentional we try to be, then we have 23 strong opinions around the family boardroom. Some of you, actually there's some people that in my notes I quote that are sitting here, so it's in no way intimidating here. But I think, so one of the grandfathers held by the nickname Stormfool, which in English probably translates something like battering ram, or what? Thunderbird, yeah, something like this. So conflict is also always going to be part of it. And so when we started with this process, we thought, how can we create room for dialogue and conversation that would, in a way, address some of these conflicts, and how can we commit to the common greater good for the longer term in serving our grandchildren rather than our own interests.
Thanks, John. Johann, over to you. The same question, but in a different context. So you've now been part of I think, successful leadership transition within your own organization. So you've just recently taken over as CEO of SAD from Johann de Pre. But also in your portfolio, there has been a business, at least one that you've told me about. There might be more that also had to do a leadership transition from the founder, coming to basically retirement. In those sort of two transitions, what has been your recipes for success there? Unless they haven't been successful, at least I can vouch for the one. I don't know about the other one.
Thanks, Almero. So I think the biggest ingredient for success, the most important one, is trust. And both the transition between Johann and myself and at this investee company, the previous leader is still in the business, albeit focusing on a different level of the business. So maybe that's just to contextualize the transitions that I've been privy to. The leader is not disappearing. The former leader is still in the business, fulfilling a different role, but still there. So both at SAD and at this investee company that I'll reference. And I think if that's the case, then between the previous leader and the new leader, there needs to be proper trust. And if it can be underpinned by like a phileo love, a brotherly love, even better. I do believe that that gives you the foundation from which you can actually successfully manage a transition. And then to over-communicate. So Johann and I committed to over-communicate with each other, because there will be times where we misinterpret or misunderstand each other, and I think that's just very important. And I think then one thing that helped me a lot was Johann and I talking about the what, the how, and the why. And when it comes to the why, we are 100% aligned, and I think that's also important. If you go from previous leader to new leader, is there alignment in the why? I think that just takes a lot of noise out the system. And then to over-communicate with regards to the what. What will you still be involved in? What will I now be involved in? What will we be involved in together? And when it comes to us, like crafting group strategy, both of us will be involved in that what. But then on the how I lead, there's complete freedom for me to lead according to my preferences, my temperament, and having that freedom, knowing that there's that underpin, that why underpin, 100% overlap, and over-communication on the what really has helped a lot.
Thanks, Johann. And then Pramod, you in even a very different context there in Silicon Valley, in the VC space, it's typically not family businesses. But in terms of succession there, how do you tackle that in the businesses that you invest in?
Sure, yeah, let me address that. Maybe even give you an example of a couple of companies. So, as you pointed out in Silicon Valley, we don't have a lot of family businesses. There might be, maybe one or two that we've funded over the years. Most of these companies are, where an entrepreneur comes up with a new idea, and he comes and he looks for money, and he will find a lead investor who would put money in, maybe one or two investors, sometimes only one investor, and then over a period of time, they spend the money that we've given them, put in $10 million, might last for a year and a half. They need more capital, and so they come back, and we have to introduce them to some new investors, in addition to us putting some new money in. And so that's how the funding process goes. Now, typically, what happens is in the tech space, and it's also true in the biopharma space, and biomedical space, and so on. When we're looking for innovators, we're looking for entrepreneurs that are very skilled technically. They understand the product, and they're very product-centric. And so usually what happens is, we fund an entrepreneur, and we put money in, and they start building the product. It takes usually 2 years to get the initial product built, and then they get to a point where they have to sort of start to go to the market and get some customers and so on. And usually, for the first year or so, they do a pretty good job sitting down with customers. Not all customers will buy from a startup, but there are some customers that are very open to buying from a startup because they're looking for some very innovative technology. But then there comes a time when we have to now start growing the company, and it becomes very apparent that the person, the founder, is a techie, doesn't really have a go-to-market experience. And therefore there comes a time when we have to sit down with the entrepreneur, and we usually do that even when we first fund the company, that there will come a time when we will have to bring in a different CEO into the company who has a lot of understanding of the go-to-market. And that sometimes creates a little bit of confusion, but a lot of the entrepreneurs understand that because they see that happening all over. Now, there was one company that I funded almost 10, 12 years ago, or 12 years ago now. I was still an investor in it. It was started by, there was a sort of a family business. Two brothers had started a company. They were actually at that time based in Malaysia and had moved to Australia. And their father had funded them. So it was sort of a family-owned business initially. And then there came a time when they were starting to grow and they needed more capital. And they wanted to come to the US and start selling into the US. And so we basically told them at that point that, listen, for us to fund you folks, you'll have to move the company over to US. So they agreed, and we brought them in, and we funded them. And then it became very clear as they were growing, or as they were starting to grow, that they really didn't have a lot of go-to-market experience. And so what we did at that time was we said, listen, we're going to have to make a CEO change. We have to bring in a CEO into this company. So the two of them agreed. They were a little hesitant initially, but they understood. We gave them examples of other companies where we had done the same thing. And we even put them in touch with some of those entrepreneurs that had gone through this transition plan. And so we brought in a person to run the company and be the CEO. Was a lady. She did a good job. But then what started to happen was, as the company was growing, the product was getting quite outdated because the product had been built, almost like 6-7 years ago. And this lady didn't have, a lot of experience with product development. And there was a little bit of a conflict between the founders and the CEO because they wanted to spend some money on innovation and hiring new engineers and so on. And she didn't want to because she wanted to make sure that the company wasn't losing too much money. So we had to make a transition there again. We had to let her go, and we brought in a CEO who had a lot of product development experience. And he did a fantastic job getting the product renovated, and the company started to grow again. Now we run into another problem, and that is that the new CEO that we had brought in now was a very product-centric person. He had actually been in one of our companies before, so we knew him, but he was not a go-to-market person. So at that time, then we had to make another transition. We brought in a CEO, and that CEO is in place right now, and the company is growing dramatically. It's about 60 million in ARR and growing about 40% a year. And did a round of financing. Google came and put some money in Google Venture, $500 million valuation, and the company is growing dramatically. And the plan is that in the next couple of years, we'll probably take it public, and it'll be at a $2 billion valuation, which is the target we've assumed. If we can, continue to grow at 40-50% a year, and just continue to grow, and it's in the cybersecurity space. So this was an example of where the company started, and the two brothers are still there, by the way. The two brothers are still there. They still live in Australia, but the company is, the bulk of the company is based in the U.S. And then we recently went through another transition with another company. It was a startup, and we had done the seed round, and the CEO was a very tech-oriented guy. Had been in a couple of my companies before. Had been at Oracle, that had acquired one of the companies. Very tech-savvy, but very limited go-to-market experience. And so there came a time when he was running out of cash and we needed to do another round of financing. And we essentially told him that, listen, any new investor coming in will want to know, hey, who's the CEO and what kind of a background does that CEO have? You have to agree to be able to bring in a new CEO. And we just did that about, we got the company funded, and it was very clear, to the new investor that we would be looking for a CEO. And just about a couple of months ago, we brought in the new CEO. And so now, and what we did in that situation was we took the former CEO and made him chairman of the company. Right? So transition happens almost in every company that we've ever funded. Right? Very seldom have we come across a company where, the CEO and the founder have been the same all the way from where we funded them to the point where they went public and got acquired and so on. Very seldom. Maybe once or twice out of 20, 30 companies.
So you have to be very change management fit.
Yeah, change management, yeah.
We'll come back to that. Thanks, Pramod. John, to come back to the family business, you told me that the family ultimately developed a family constitution. How long did that take to develop? Is it done? And what are the kind of key I think factors in this process and in putting this family constitution together that you think are critical for such a family succession plan?
Yeah, thanks, Almero. I think so. Formally, we've been working on this constitution since 2014. I guess informally for the last 5 generations, I suppose. But when you asked me that question, I thought about it and long and hard in a sense of, to the one hand, I think it's the lessons that we learned that I think we got right, but then there are certain lessons that I feel like we're still struggling with. So on both ends, so maybe if I can just get to 7 of these points, and I'll just quickly raise it because I think it is beneficial, and I wish I knew it 10 years ago when we started this process. I think one lesson when I get to that is the benefit of having legal counsel in the family, which is also a disadvantage in the same sense.
That was you.
Yeah. So I think what we got right in lessons learned in developing the family constitution, I think first of all it developed a common language. So it allows the preschool teachers to connect with the CAs around the table because there's a common language, and that didn't start off immediately on the same page, obviously, but over time that developed, and the understanding developed well over time, so that the preschool teacher around the table is now our chairperson of the family forum, by the way. So we worked through this very book there, listed Generation to Generation, Harvard Publishing, that helped us a lot to develop this, and to recognize that there are so many different backgrounds, different skills, different exposures and gifts and interests around the table that I think the business and the family can benefit from. So that was the first one, to develop a common language. The second thing that I think we've learned was listen to all, but trust and invest in a single bum. We call it something else, but I think it's not appropriate to mention here. To drive the process. Reason for that single person view is that you have a bum to kick when the process goes south. And I mean, it's just general leadership so that we know someone takes authority. And I think that was helpful to really have a process driver in it. Then I mentioned the fact of the legal expertise in the family, but I would recommend to stay focused on the 20% core assets that determine 80% of matters. And what we did there was to structure out some of the fringe investments almost that doesn't add directly to the flywheel or to the end that, or the goose that lays the golden eggs. What's the saying? So the reason there was the issue. Issues in the small matters can really complicate the big ones. So we were intentional to structure out the non-core aspects. The fourth one was not to fear, and it sounds obvious, but as a generation 5, we were frightened about the responsibility here. There were significant leaders in the history of it. There was significant business people, significant assets, and suddenly you step into this, and now it's your turn to lead this. And we were governed in a way and led in a way by the vision that we have of Joshua and Caleb in the Bible, that they encountered various giants in their generation, but the bravery and somehow to swim stream up helped them to accomplish what the Lord promised them. And we try to take that mentality back to the family constitution. Are we merely just complying to what's happening in the prevailing culture, or do we really want to change it and swim upstream? So that's something that we think is important. The fifth lesson was that we've learned was to manage the tension. Later on in the lessons that we are still learning is to manage the tension. And some of the tensions I thought of, and those of you that follow Global Leadership Summit, I think Andy Stanley mentioned this in about 2010, 2008 already. But some of it that we've learned was the tension between business family, being a business family and a family business, having consensus or a dominant leader make the calls, because sometimes only there's consensus because the dominant leader called it. And then, are we a farming investor or an investor farmer? It's significantly different. In-laws versus blood family, executives versus unemployed, external executives versus broader family, professionality versus familiarity. All these things create tensions. And over time, to acquaint yourself with the issues around it, study into it, and learn to behave yourself in that and add value, I suppose. Sixth one is attention to formal stuff. So maybe that's where the lawyer part of me came in. But create room for formal meetings, documenting, reporting, to make those documenting of it relevant. So at the moment, of our 23 shareholders, we have 15 that's under the age of 21. So what would an AFS look like for a 12-year-old to really be attached to that? And for us, that maybe was the biggest issue over the last 15 years, is how do you connect the hearts to the legal stuff, to the structure stuff, to the strategy stuff? And just recently I had a discussion with our CFO to say, is there a way to communicate the AFS so that the broader shareholders can actually understand and appreciate what's going on? And then in all of that also to structure the family part and the enterprise part separately and get professional help in that. And then pray, continue to pray. And a lot depends on you, but at the same time, a lot also doesn't depend on you. We had this instance of just the global citrus price 3-4 years ago that went the other way than what we planned. And suddenly there's a lot of questions being asked around how things are managed, but those were never the questions when there was the citrus boom and everyone planted Sier Miljoene, and it was like everyone wants to be in the citrus game. So nobody questioned leadership or questioned calls around the boardroom table. But when the economy went down, so I think there's a big matter of understanding that do as best as you can and structure as properly as you can with constitutions and legal matters, but then it's also to surrender it. And quickly, just the 3 aspects that we're busy with, and I'm just going to mention it and maybe share it. There's so much in it. I told Almero that I can probably share 3 days on this, but in just 1 minute. Still learning to manage the tensions. Even with proper counsel and documentation, we sometimes tend to go around in circles because it's family. So you don't want to step on toes because Sunday you have to eat a meal with the person that you're confronting. So in that case, it helps to have a ground rules and principles and constitution to reflect back on. We keep the constitution relatively dynamic, and we involve and deal with emerging issues such as exits and valuations and those kind of things. And then ask the big question, what if a matter disconnects with our culture? We often use the example of a surfer grandchild that wants to go to the Gold Coast and just give calls when he wants dividends. How do you deal with that? And how do you relate to that in terms of conflict management? So our constitution actually deals with that too. And just the last point is how do you look as a family after the core assets, core family, core executives? And in that, sometimes there's also a tension. If you look after core executives well, it's going to have the imbalance to the core family. And in all of that, to have an undergirding process formalized to deal with this, I think is incredibly important that all can benefit from.
Thanks, John. So, Johann said over-communicate. In your case, it's literally, explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks, John. Johann, in your case, not being a family business, the family kind of has its own DNA. You have to kind of build DNA. And DNA is a lot, as you said, a lot harder to scale than to scale commercially. How do you scale DNA in a non-family business?
Yeah, Almero, so we often say that it's way easier to scale commercially than it is to scale your DNA and your culture. So the more precious you are, the more jealous you are about your culture and your DNA, the longer it's going to take, the more you're going to have to think about it. If you just want to scale commercially, and if you're thinking succession from a commercial aspect, you can do it way more regularly and you can do it way faster. But if you want to scale or transition and hold your culture and not lose your culture and your DNA, it does take more time. So it's the more you're almost looking for a roommate as opposed to someone that's going to live in this residence with me. The chemistry needs to be high, the worldview overlap needs to be high, there needs to be a proper DNA overlap. And I think it just boils down to time and sharing life together and communicating over time. So I think it is something that takes time. There's a portion of DNA overlap that's there from day one, hopefully, if you've chosen that roommate well. And then there's a portion of impartation of DNA and culture over time that you can't bake in superficially and artificially with a 7-minute abs type approach, which I wish that was true, but I've realized that 41 it's not true. Never was for me. So I think that's just, it takes time, it will take longer than you think it will take, and if you're really serious about your culture and your DNA and you haven't started planning your succession, then rather start sooner than later, because it's going to be more difficult than just scaling commercially and doing it for the sake of commercials.
Thanks, Johann. Brahma, just reflecting on it sounds like you're almost changing CEOs every 2 years in your businesses. How do you manage that change management?
Well, it's not every 2 years. Usually, like I said, once you bring in someone that is a go-to-market expert and the company has already built a product, so it's doing well, then that CEO can be there for 5, 6, 7 years, so it's not an issue.
But if you got have you built a change management methodology that you now know this works and this is how we handle it all the time? And have you kind of codified that, or is that just institutional knowledge that you've built over time?
No, it's basically, just based on, what we've done in the past over and over again. When we, usually not every CEO will, when they're being transitioned out of the CEO role, some of them will stay with the company, right? Some of them will leave, but some of them are happy to stay. Their role will change. They'll become a senior advisor, or they'll become a senior strategic officer, or CTO, whatever. So the one that we just did, where we brought in a new CEO, the former CEO now is chairman and chief technology officer, because that's his expertise, right? And so and that's very common in Silicon Valley. People know that companies know that transitions will take place because that's the way the system works.
So what I'm hearing from you, and also from what you said earlier, Johann, you almost want to agree up front what the role of the outgoing leader is going to be post the transition. And you ideally want the previous leader to be willing to be around, to be there as a mentor and a coach, and still be involved in the business if they want to be and can be. But you have to almost agree what the ground rules are before the time.
Yeah, exactly that. I think you have to have a blueprint that you need to over-communicate, and that will change. It will be dynamic. So as you go along, you'll realize that we'll need to tweak here, we'll need to tweak there. But it's just to be, once again, to over-communicate it. To Johan's earlier point today about talking about a chair, make sure we're both talking about a lazy boy, at least as a start. And then we can talk about the color later on and, you know, how big the slant must be when you go backwards. But that'll change. But if you're willing to have that conversation, and if there's complete trust, and once again, I mean, I can say it explicitly in this context with everyone here today. If there's that phileo love underpinning that relationship, that brotherly love, and 100% trust, then you can tweak it as you go along. And you'll make mistakes. Both parties will make mistakes. But because of the fact that you trust each other, that there's complete love, you'll be able to work it out. And if you're willing to do that, then I think it can work very well.
Thanks, Johan. John, just to follow on the family constitution, I'm assuming that that's not a legally binding document. It's something that you have to, by sharing and agreeing on it in the family, build that agreement that this is the principles by which we go. But we can't, it's not a contract. Do you need to translate that into some form of a legal agreement, like a shareholders agreement?
Yeah, I think that's been part of the learning process too, to think how you can give legal teeth to the set of rules that you've created that comes from the heart and the values, right? So that it would be the perfect preamble to a shareholders agreement. Over time, I think what has developed is almost cultural norms. In a way, for the culture, it's stronger than a legal document. In the end, if things go pear-shaped and in the court, it's a different process. But in the midst of the boardroom table, the cultural norms over the last 10 years specifically, but even prior to that, and through consistency, has brought great benefit to us. So even in a transition where for the first time now, we have a managing director that's non-family, he's directly bound, although not legally and enforceably, he's bound to those cultural norms, and that has been a significant part of negotiating his appointment. So I think the aspect of what has come about through being consistent, I think I thought about it beforehand, that I think what consistency does for an investment, I thought, what do you say at an investors conference is consistency compounds, that would go off well. So what consistency does for investors, I think intentionality does for leadership and for culture. And so over time, to be intentional and consistent in the norms that we've created, have set out a culturally binding document, which now we have to get to the place of legally binding document. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Last question before I open it to the floor. If any of you have got a question or two, we've got some time for that, and we'll have a bit of a table discussion. Pramod, maybe just to go back to the opportunity in South Africa that I think is kind of coming with family businesses that are going to have to transition. I think the US is probably a little bit ahead of us in that. And we've seen some funds, some of the people in this community are invested in a fund or two in the US that specifically has been created to invest in family businesses. But it's probably still quite small, or are you starting to see funds that at scale can provide that succession for family businesses in the US?
Well, yeah, so, I mean, there are... we have law firms that'll help. We also do a little bit of private equity stuff, and so once in a while we'll come across a family business that we're funding, but we make it very clear when we're funding it that there will be CEO changes, and people are okay with that. They understand that will be valuable to them as well. In the long run, the company will do better. Higher growth, higher valuation. So, those are discussions that happen, yeah.
Thanks, Pramod.